last session. What's today's date?
The 12th.
The 12th. All right, I knew that. So this input demo that I started earlier, and inputs are one of the most complex pieces of the interface to actually style, and they're one of the most difficult ones. And why I wanted to show this and separate this out is as we build out a navigation really quickly, I kind of want to skim over the input piece. So by default, a text input looks like this, and I can type in here. But you'll notice things like this highlight, that's part of the browser. The default width of this and rendering are right here from the user agent. So this is highlighting it, inspecting it, and looking at the user agent. So these are all the properties. Now what's really interesting about inputs are how they render, not just from different browsers, but also from different operating systems. So as you do a reset and a normalize, you have to add a lot of properties that may not even be rendering in one browser to another. The example that I gave earlier is if I open up this exact code, which is just an input, in iOS on Safari versus iOS and Chrome versus Safari and Chrome on the desktop or Chrome on Windows, they're all going to render slightly different. So in Safari mobile, Safari on iOS, it has a border radius on it, so it has kind of rounded corners. It also has an inset drop shadow or a box shadow, and the font that's actually going in there is a different font that's actually happening in the browser. So if I look at this, I think it's Blink is the default on iOS and Chrome. So if I look at the font family, no, System UI. It's also rendered at 11 pixel font by default, which is very, very bizarre because by accessibility standards, it should be 16 pixels. And on iOS or mobile devices, iOS as well as Android, if you don't have 16 pixel as your font size for an input, if you click on it, it does this weird zoom effect. And yeah, so you always want to, so to me it makes no sense why that happens and why default in Chrome and Safari does it actually render at a different size.
So when you're looking, when you inspect that in Chrome, you're seeing that it you can see that it somewhere else it'll be doing some of these things.
No, I can't. That's
it's not
so this
perfectly
is
user
that's
agent.
why I'm saying like this is one of the trickiest pieces. So let's open this up in this exact same code and look at it in Safari here. Oh. All right. So do you see this even like how this has this border, and do you see the rounded corner here versus like here? Like it's slightly different, but the actual properties are even different that are coming across. So you can see all these different things that are inside here. And these are not one for one as in Chrome. It's very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the only way you would find that out is to actually open them in the different browsers and then inspect them.
Yeah, it's experience and knowledge of it. So there's certain things that I just know to do.
Lead me to ask so the user agent, that is not telling you what actual defaults of any of these properties are. It's just saying what is happening in this current browser.
That's absolutely true. And for the most case or use case, it is consistent.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to do something like this to kind of get this started and say see input. Excuse me. I'm going to add a value and say hi, just so we can see that. Another really fun thing is what's referred to as shadow DOM and the hidden CSS selectors, like a placeholder. So a placeholder is something like this. They're instructional, so it's like enter your name or something like that. Do you see how it's like grayed out? You can actually style that, but the way that you do it is really confusing. So it's a pseudo selector, and in the use case of it is browser prefix. So you have to know those.
That's a good practice to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, for accessibility, every input has to have a label, and it has to have the label ID or the label target that's going to be equivalent to the ID of the input that you have. And every input should have a placeholder. The placeholder is instructional. It shouldn't be one for what your label is. So, for example, your label could say telephone number. And then in the input, it could give you instructions on the formatting of what your acceptance criteria is for it. So,
is it similar to like alt tags and stuff?
Not really, because alt tags are meant for if the image doesn't render,
Right.
for text to come through, and it's also for the browser. Same thing for accessibility for someone, whether it's a bot going out there or someone that can't visually see it,
Right.
to know what the image is. So it's a description of the image.
Right.
Kind of,
But that's different
it's
than like a label.
yeah, because the placeholder is instructional on what the acceptance criteria is.
But we when we're making stuff, thinking about this, we think about people using screen readers.
Yeah.
So if a screen reader was reading an input, it would read the placeholder, or would it read the label?
It would read both of them.
It would like one after another.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So with this, I don't typically I wouldn't do this typically, but you can copy this, so then you can also reference. And if you really wanted to, you can go to the other browsers and do this. And one of the things I was talking about earlier too is if I change these to different types. So a search has a use case, and this is meant for. And do you see how that even changed in the current browser has a rounded corner?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of inconsistencies even from it, but they're intentional. But this is meant for if I'm typing, I can hit clear, so it has that additional functionality. There's what's referred to as tell, and this is one of my favorite things on mobile devices. It brings up the digit keypad, so it brings up different virtual keyboards based off the input types, which is really nice. But this allows me to put other inputs in. Let me get rid of this. If I put number, this only allows, so I'm typing in here, but it only allows numbers inside here. But I can also have this up and down. And on mobile devices, it's really nice. There's what's referred to as calendar. This is a, or is it cal? No, it's date, sorry. Yeah, so date, and then it has this. Now this one is very difficult to style and consistency, and it's not supported, I think, all the way through IE 11. But the cool thing about it is, even if that doesn't pop up, the formatting of this is really nice, you know, that I can just type that in. So there's a lot of really cool things that happen with inputs, and there's a handful of them that you can search, but they have specific use cases, and they're meant for being the content.
We want to see all of this happening in the forums.
Well, and so good forms that you're doing a positive onboarding experience are the ones that actually optimize these correctly, and also the naming of them comes into play. So modern browsers have your stored information in them. So something like fname or name, it will populate that from previous inputs that you've done. So there's you can Google search it suggestions on input names if you want them to be kind of more auto completed. So there's actually a method of naming things. Anyways, so here were all the form fields that I kind of copied based out of box. So I'm just kind of aware of it. I'm just going to comment this out.
Can you find the water bottle?
Yeah, there's a water
Yeah.
machine right out there. Yeah. But this is really nice to start thinking about what properties I have to overwrite, especially if I'm thinking about this as a reusable thing. So there's some weird alignment things in CSS properties that you would never necessarily use. Appearance is going to be your best friend when you try to style things like a select inbox or a select. So if I put a select in here, oops, an option. So your question to me earlier was, hey, can you just style these with CSS as opposed to JavaScript or combination? And yeah, but there's some tricks to it.
Well, I think the reason I asked that, I think, was the idea that it's now you're starting to incorporate data like where is this going, and like how is it interacting with maybe other
Yeah.
stuff? Like if it was a search bar, how is it accessing like whatever database or searching out?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. A lot of times there is a combination of them. All right, so what we will do is we'll create something called cform and then a select. So select in this input here. And the goal is, as you're trying to create reusable pieces, is to try to find consistency and reuse as much as possible. So if we said something like cform, and I could even look at this, what I'm going to do is for cselect, I'm going to start by saying appearance, none. So this kind of, it still treats as a select box, but it removes like some of the default, so I can start adding styles to it. I could say all my forms are going to have a border of 1 pixel solid. Let's just make it red so it's easy to see. As I talked about earlier, consistency, border radius, I'm going to make it 0, right? I'm going to add a line height of 1 inside here. I'm going to say my font size is 1 rem, which is equivalent to my 16 pixels. And I'm going to give it a display inline block. I like to avoid block in this. And back to what I was showing like earlier in the positioning, I could add it 100% width later to make it be the full width of it. This gives me a little bit more flexibility on how I'm controlling these. And then because this is, you know, I showed you down here the font family. So the ones that you really want to be paying attention to is like, what is weird in here? Like font being system UI, I have to add my default font family inside here. So font family. I'm just going to say sans serif. So here we're starting to see this, but the padding, so if I look at something like this, like why is this and this not the same height? So we look at the user agent here. 0, 0. And this guy has a padding of 1. So that's kind of the difference between these two. So you want to find consistency for it. Now another thing is I would highly recommend using the box sizing before and after. And I'm using it on the star selector. So this is every attribute that's possible out there, box sizing, border box. But you could, I guess, potentially add it just to form if you needed to, if this was too far reaching, if you're working in an interface that already existed. But here we have this, and we're going to add a padding. And I'm going to show you kind of like a weird trick that I like to do on inputs. And we're just going to say, we want our inputs to kind of look big and kind of find like the large ones. So I'm going to say something like 5 pixels, and, or yeah, that's huge. And we're going to say 0 and 0. Okay. And what I'm going to do is a text indent of 10 pixels. So do you see right here, this is like going off to the side and it's over here. But as I type, it goes from edge to edge. So it's like this nice, like, it looks cool when you have an input. It's not really that cool, but that's just one thing that I like to do. And then we're going to do an outline of none. And we're going to also do a box shadow of none, even though I don't see those. And this kind of gets me in this interesting place of why are these still not rendering the same way, even though we have all this. Give me 1 second. Let me go back to this. And I just want to show you what this looks like inside here. Okay.
So what you did that you added padding on the bottom, and that's why
Yeah.
it looks centered.
Yeah. Yeah, I realized that I typoed this wrong. I didn't mean to do that. So that's why the side was off. But I wanted to show you kind of the difference between this and the offsetting here. All right, so let's do this, because this is going to be a variable. So again, thinking about reuse here, all forms have the padding top and bottom of this 10 pixel. And this allows me to have the consistency inside here. So one of the things that you want to do when you're doing inputs is you want to make sure that this active cursor blinking is in the middle from top to bottom. If you're doing this wrong, then you'll see it either at the bottom or top, and kind of go like this, right? So for inputs, I'm going to do text index. 5 pixels. And then for my select box, I'm going to say padding right 5 pixels and left, left 5 pixels. Now I may also want to do this for something like, even though I'm not building it right now, see textarea and include these over here. So a textarea has like the same setup. Because this guy, I want the overflow to go like this, but on these ones where I'm not inputting it, and a text area is kind of a different use case. So text area is like the block of text, multiple rows. So here we kind of have a start to like of putting together an input, and this is just like really scratching the surface on the styles of what to do with inputs, and that's why I didn't really want to get too much into it today. But why I wanted to use this as a use case is to understand like what's happening here and the different things that you have to deal with, from the borders, the base styling, what's actually being shared from all these other ones. Like color is another really strange one to deal with. The text shadow right here kind of gives you an indicator. Text align is even a little strange. Some of the ones that I showed earlier, like if I change this over to search, it would render a little bit differently than how the text one looks. But the idea is, as I create different form fields and add things in here, that we have a consistent look from a UI. So here's this text input. Oops. So we've created like a family of inputs really easily. In this, I can turn this off in CSS if I want to say see text area resize none. So now that won't have that resize, which is kind of cool.
Is it just automatic feature?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that you've styled these and taken away some of those defaults, will you have a lot of the same issues you would have initially with the browsers?
No.
Or
Yeah.
you
So
kind of fix that by styling.
Yeah, and that's also like the nice way of like doing something like C form and then identifying each one of them. Because if I identify that there's an issue in one browser, I can update one CSS property in C form, and it'll cascade through all of them. And then also things like if I want to change my font family or like my style of this to 1, I can update it here. So this gives me a little bit more consistency, and then it makes me easily identify any issues with it. Buttons are very similar, stylizing buttons, and that was something that we covered, like how do I make an anchor, a button element, as well as like an input submit or an input type submit. How do I make them all look consistency? So form elements and some of those, and it's primarily just because button is another form element. They have a lot of weirdness that goes on. Text shadow is another one that in some browsers they have it, so I like to do this also. But these are things that you need to just be consciously aware of, and you'll see this as you work in different browsers. And inputs are some of the hardest things to find consistency, but once you learn how to do them, they really, like, you've kind of mastered creating consistent UIs. So, all right. That was, again, a long explanation of why we're not talking about inputs in navigation. So next thing I'm going to kind of cover is quickly going over how to build out a navigation. And I'm using this as a kind of my example because this is kind of a base one. It's going to touch on positioning relative and kind of building out navigation and a Chrome for a website.
Random question, I don't want to forget.
Yeah.
What kind of event Columbus Web Group?
What was that?
Columbus Web Group.
Oh, Columbus Web Group. Our next one is called Being There, and it's on the 29th, I believe, or 28th. It's the last Wednesday of this month, and Jeff Brees is talking about how to be present and how to really be an active participant in conversations, of being an active coworker, employee, and different ways to deal with stress or complexities of projects. So you can always be a part of the team and how to be an active team member. Yeah.
Is it the same as the next mentoring thing? Is it all in the same meetup?
No.
So I have the 29th as the mentoring.
Oh, it's, let me look really quick so I'm not yeah, because we had to move things around based off of the mentoring. That is on it is on the 29th.
Well, I think, yeah, I don't know exactly. It's just like starting all over again. Right?
Yeah, we're doing a second session of it, so yeah, trying to get people lined up.
Can I want to be lined up again?
Yeah, you can definitely be lined up again. Yeah, I'm trying to, I don't want to misspeak, but 20th and 29th, it's back to back. We're
So
gonna, it's 2 days in a row. Yeah,
Alright.
yeah. So it's gonna be a party.
Do I
Oh,
have-
actually, you know what? We decided to change that. That's why I'm confused on that. We are moving the mentoring to the first week of April.
Gotcha.
That way, it's not overwhelming because we were asking people about that. I was like, oh, that would be really fun, but
To do 2 nights in a row.
yeah. So
So do I have to like sign up online for that if I wanted to?
yeah, just the mentoring.columbuswebgroup.com.
That's the last time I
And-
could sign up to you.
Yeah.
Yay.
Well, yeah. If you could sign up,
Okay.
and we're gonna have an Eventbrite for that, and it's gonna be at Improving Enterprises, so they're sponsoring the mentoring event that night. So, yeah, cool. All right, so we're gonna cover kind of a quick, probably go through it really quickly, so we can have time at the end, but building out a navigation, and it'll hit on some of these, almost every single thing that we've talked about.